So welcome, everybody. This is the second of our rattlesnake stories presented by the Rattlesnake Creek Watershed Group. We are a voluntary group that works to educate about the rattlesnake, about the watershed, to provide all kinds of, like one of the things we do is have an event with an apple pressing, which we have in order to educate the idea about if you leave the apples on your trees, then the bears are probably going to come and get them. And so we have a diverse group sort of set of things that we do. But the main thing is to educate about the Rattlesnake Creek and the watershed, which some of you may have been way up there to look at that. So this is the second of our rattlesnake stories for this season, I guess. This is the winter season of 2025. I was going to say 2015, but never mind, 2025. We really want to thank MCAT, who are filming this today behind you. We received a grant from them to film this, and then it will be available on YouTube. You don't need to take notes. You can get YouTube. So thank you so much for being here and for doing that. And I'm going to welcome, oh no, wait, one more thing. How many of you heard about us through the newsletter? Okay. How many, okay, I'm going to keep going. How many of you heard of us because of the amazing flyers that I put up all over town? Okay. Okay, how many of you heard, let's see, Missoula events? Aha, that's interesting. Okay, so that's, what have I forgotten? There's something else. Oh, thank you. How many of you know about us from word of mouth? Oh my God, okay. Keep talking, everybody. All right. So I just want to introduce Morgan, and I'm going to hold this little piece of paper and read it somewhat, which is, I know, terribly boring. I'll try not to be boring. Morgan Valliant has worked for over 25 years involving in improving habitats and recreational experiences in general in Missoula. Morgan earned a degree from the university, this very university, the University of Montana, and then got a master's degree from Washington State University. He served originally as the City of Missoula's conservation lands manager, and during that time he built a fledgling two-person program, this is amazing, into a regionally recognized model for municipal management of public natural areas. And those of you familiar with what goes on in Missoula, it's the first time I've lived in it. There's just so many entities concerned with conservation and love of nature and all those. Anyway, I just think that's amazing. Let's see. Beyond that, right now he is head of the Ecosystem Services Division of the City of Missoula. And he focuses his efforts on the development of large collaborative environmental and outdoor projects. And here's a couple of examples. He has led several recently, including the planning and development of the Mount Dean Stone Preserve, the Clark Fork River Access and Restoration Project, and the public acquisition and planning of Marshall Mountain Regional Park. So that's a lot of important things around here. And in addition to that, since 2017, Morgan has also served as one of 3 primary project leaders involved with developing and implementing a plan for the city's historic water delivery system on Rattlesnake Creek. And that's why we invited Morgan today, because you're going to learn about some of these efforts from Morgan. And I want to throw in an extra thing, which you did not give me, Morgan, but I will tell you, everybody. Morgan recently received the 2025 Arnold Bawley Award from the Missoula Conservation Roundtable. So congratulations for that. Okay, I give you Morgan.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. This is a project I've been working on for a while and have absolutely loved. It really is just a perfect marriage between large-scale habitat restoration, recreation, and then human history, which I find as a land manager is just one of the more interesting things that we do, tying all those different things together, how people have historically used an area, how they're using it now, and then also all the great resources that are on site. for nature. And so I'm going to talk about our work over the last, I guess 6-7 years, up Rattlesnake Creek all the way into the headwaters of Rattlesnake Creek in the Rattlesnake Wilderness. And so this is where this picture is today. This is Glacier Lake, one of the lakes that has a municipal water dam on it. It's about from where we stand, and we had to lower the shades, but you would be able to see up the Rattlesnake. This is probably 20 plus miles from where we are today, straight up at the very high alpine cirque, at the very headwaters. The headwaters of the Rattlesnake is literally that ridge you see right there above the lake. And this really, this work came about from our city's acquisition of the water utility. And there's a really rich, unique history that we have within Missoula on how we got our drinking water. It used to be like this. This is the earliest picture we've been able to find of Missoula's first water delivery system. And so it was literally a guy and a kid that would pull buckets out of the creek, and they'd bring water to your house, and you'd get it, your daily allowance of water by a donkey cart. In 1871, Warden and Higgins built a diversion off of Rattlesnake Creek and brought that water into downtown Missoula to start Missoula Waterworks and Milling Company. That was the first structure that was built in downtown Missoula. And what was crazy is by 1885, the creek was actually running dry. And it was because the amount of irrigation water and the amount of drinking water that was getting diverted, it was unfettered, not a lot of regulation. It's also worth noting that for millennia before this time, the Salish people relied on Rattlesnake Creek specifically for bull trout. It was a primary food source that got them through the winter. Every year they would establish for a month or two a fishing camp right at the headwaters of Rattlesnake and the Clark Fork River and collect bull trout and store them to get through the winter. And it was between 1871 and 1902 that fishery really started to collapse, and that way of life totally changed. It didn't all, the fish run was incredibly impacted, and then of course at the same time, settlers were actively pushing Salish peoples out of the valley. In 1902, the Missoula Waterworks and Milling Company realized they needed to be able to capture more water. At the time, it was just a ditch running out of the creek, and so they built this dam and reservoir. And this is it's removed now, but it was about 5 miles up the creek from where we are today. Really quickly, as the community grew, they realized they needed even more water. And between 1911 and 1921, that's when they started building roads up into the Rattlesnake and into the Grant Creek Basin and over into the Rattlesnake to access 8 alpine lakes in the Wrangell and Lake Creek basins, and started to build these dams. All these dams, here's the original drawing of that water system with the lower intake dam here, the City of Missoula here. The intake dam is this one. And then up the creek are these 8 lakes with eventually 10 dams. Those lakes were existing, and they were just impounded to hold more water. What's crazy is that allowed for 820 million gallons of snow melt to be captured and then released later for drinking water and downstream uses. Between 24 and 40, they upgraded this dam, faced it with concrete, built these big wooden water mains. This is actually how Missoula got its water until about the 80s. These are old-growth redwood, basically like staves in a barrel, where it was a 30-inch wooden water main that was wrapped with a wire to hold it all together. And once it had water, it would swell, and that is what conveyed water from this site into town and then into people's taps. Right around that same time in 1936, and of course Warden and Higgins weren't a part of this, it had sold a couple times, the Montana Power Company purchased the majority of the private land above the lower intake dam. And so that's a lot of what is now present-day Rattlesnake Recreation Area. In 1980, that is when, so I think a couple other things to note. The main stem, the main corridor trail that gets you up there was the road that was built to build these dams. All the trails that connect these lakes were also built to build these dams and create this municipal water supply. In 1980, the Rattlesnake Recreation Area and Wilderness Area were created. And suddenly, these lakes and dams were within a designated federal wilderness. In '83, a few years after that, there was a big Giardia outbreak in town, and the water company disconnected these 30-inch wooden water mains, disconnected the lower intake dam from our taps. I don't know if when this actually happened, but in that same year, they sold 21,000 acres to the Forest Service, and so that our Rattlesnake Recreation Area, which is 61,000, grew by over a third through that one sale. Oh, I think I might have missed a slide there. Yeah, okay, sorry. So, bringing us into the modern era, when we look at how Missoula took over its water utility, a lot of folks that weren't around when this was occurring, the City of Missoula had a deal with Mountain Water Company to purchase the water utility. The company ended up selling to Carlisle Group. It, I think, sold twice. And we realized that none of the money that we were paying as ratepayers was actually getting reinvested in our community. It was all going to shareholders in other states. And so our mayor at the time and city council sued for eminent domain, and they won. And in 2017, we paid full market value for our water utility. As soon as we got that, we realized a few things. One, 50% of the water that was going into our pipes was leaking. And so it was an incredibly inefficient system. There had not been a lot of reinvestment in those pipes and that infrastructure. And so there was a lot of work that was put on that. We also realized very quickly that this myth that we'd been hearing since 1983, that someday we would reconnect, in case of emergency, reconnect that lower intake dam to our pipes in cases of emergency, was not practical. It would not have worked. And so that whole water utility system that we're talking about today, we learned really quickly after 2017 that we needed to figure out a different plan for that. Some of the other things that happened, besides the water utility, there was about 200 acres of land that came with it, land holdings that the company had, and valuable water rights. And so shortly after 2017, we got together and decided we needed to start come up with a plan for these properties. We got together in early 2018 in the mayor's office and tried to convince Mayor Ingen to allow us to pull together a partnership to remove the lower intake dam and reservoir. And any of you that have met Mayor Ingen knew what a great man he was, and it didn't take much convincing. Within 3 to 5 minutes, he was like, yeah, go do it, figure it out. And we really thought it was gonna take us, I don't know, a decade. Really only took us about 3 years, which was kind of crazy. And we couldn't have done that with strong partnerships and also strong public support. So the city, Trout Unlimited, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and the U.S. Forest Service started to look at partner to talk about the wilderness dams. And then more specifically, the city, TU, and FWP started to talk about what to do with this lower intake dam first. This is within the city limits. It was right in town. This lower intake dam, if you follow the creek 20 some odd miles up into these hills, you'd be at those upper wilderness dams. Some of the things that were happening at the time at this lower intake dam, this had been a major fish passage since 1902. There was actually you can just see this little bit of whitewater here. This was a fish ladder that was installed in 2011, and fish would actually climb up, and then there's a few outlet pipes to let sunlight in, and they could get through and get into this reservoir and around the dam. Unfortunately, this head gate burst, and it changed the flow dynamics about 2 years after this was put in, and it just wasn't passing fish. So every year, Trout Unlimited, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks were actually coming here, netting fish, carrying them across this lawn, and dumping them back into the reservoir. That was the only way a fish could get through this, especially during peak flows, because this was just like a jet plume coming out of the gates. Very early on, and I think what was really interesting at the time working for the city, when we brought on the water utility, we brought on all the people that had been working for that private utility for decades in some cases. And it was really cool to talk to the people that had been managing this site for decades. And I was always struck, a guy, Dennis Bowman, who came over and was running the water utility when the city took ownership, and he was a deputy director for the city during the majority of this project. He told me when we first started having these discussions about removal, we were really concerned that we were going to get pushback from water utility employees that had come over to the city. And he said, Morgan, you know, this dam is going to come out one way or another. Either nature's going to take it out or man's going to take it out, and it's probably going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. This thing was incredibly decrepit. It was falling apart. We were spending, when we first took ownership of it, I think it was like $30,000 a year in maintenance of a facility that supplied no real public benefit at that point. In fact, it had a bunch of negative things that it was supplying. So this was our first project, and we really needed to figure out, obviously, how to remove a lot of infrastructure and rebuild active floodplain and a natural stream and turn back the clock. This is some of the infrastructure we were looking at. This was the flood of 2018, which we thought might just do our work for us. It was overtapping this big concrete wall that separated the reservoir from the existing creek. Had significant issues with debris getting pressed up against here. This cabin occupied a ton of time. This cabin was put in largely as a corporate retreat for the folks that own the water company, and that's largely what it was used for since the 90s. It really wasn't it wasn't eligible for public use. We looked at actually maybe making that into an education center or something, but unfortunately all this infrastructure was right in the floodplain, and it all needed to come out. So it was really quite amazing. Within 2 years, we got so much support from local folks, from folks outside our community, giving us money, donations, small grants to fund this work. We did get a large $700,000 FEMA grant. We were able to raise about $2 million in 2 years and move this project forward. What was really unique about this project is, although this was a city facility, 80% of the money that it took to actually do this work was not taxpayer dollars. It was all outside of our community, donations, grants, that kind of stuff. So we leveraged a significant amount of resources. And this happened. We got all of our funding, we got all of our permits, we got it all approved. I remember it was February 2020. We're like, we're going to do this summer. And then in March 2020, things changed fundamentally. And so, but we decided not to stop. We were like, this pandemic will be over by August. And so we pushed forward. And so we did all of this during the pandemic in 2020, mobilized folks from August all the way through October. Most of the work was removing this infrastructure. We had to cut a channel around the dam site once we got rid of the reservoir, put the creek into that side channel to then remove all this infrastructure where the dam is at, to then put the creek back into the channel that we built. This was all a historic resource. And unfortunately, we weren't able to retain any of it on site. And so we did also salvage a significant amount of the historic valve structures. And those of you that are familiar with the Rattlesnake or do walks along the creek. We're actually building a trailhead right now at the end of Duncan Drive. And by next summer, we'll have a 1-mile loop trail that goes up to this site. And we're actually right now, this week, contractors are building a kiosk at the far end that's going to be built out a lot of the stuff that we salvaged from the dam that's going to tell the history of the site and the history of the project. So later in 2020, this is moving into the fall, we rebuilt several, I think it was around 1,500 feet of stream channel, all these brush banks, put in, I think it was 15,000 native plants and 10,000 willow cuttings. What was great is right here in September when we were doing this work, people were kind of ready to get out of the house. And so we did it all with volunteer labor. This was work that you could do with your family unit and have 6 feet of separation. And we would sign up for a volunteer event, and we had to start capping them at 100 people, and we would sign up within 2 hours. There was thousands of hours of Missoulians' time put in planting these plants and, rebuilding this habitat. This is what it looked right after the first year after it planted. After I planted it, I don't have a picture of what it looks like today, but you wouldn't actually be able to see what we built today because it is now well on its way to becoming a riparian forest, which was our intent. So there's this upland bench. There's the main creek channel. That dam used to be right here. Oh, actually, sorry, right here. And then this was the reservoir. Some of the things that was really cool is building some of these overflow side channels. We found all these seeps that come in at the toe of Mount Jumbo that were able to connect into a 4-acre perennial wetland. And so just the amount of habitat that we were able to create on this 12-acre site was pretty fascinating. And the year after, I mean, the place was just crawling with reptiles and amphibians. We've had just bird counts going through the roof. It's very much, and those of you that have done habitat restoration know, it's a build it and they will come scenario. Wildlife really finds their way back. And of course, we've just connected from the Clark Fork River all the way 30 miles into the Rattlesnake, full fish connection. And so that was incredibly significant for the fishery as well. So let's move into the wilderness. So above, the way this system used to work was there were these 10 dams on 8 lakes. And so you can't quite see it here, but you see it on another map. Rattlesnake Creek, about 15 miles up from the main trailhead, Rattlesnake Recreation Area main trailhead, splits into Wrangell Creek and Lake Creek. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lakes, McKinley, Warden, Carter, Big, and Sheridan. In Lake Creek, each one of these little asterisks is a dam. Some lakes have 2 dams. And then in Wrangell Creek, there's 3 lakes and 4 dams, Little, Glacier, and Sanders. And the way this would work was, when the reservoir would start to get low, someone would roll up there on mule or later, on motorbike and turn a valve in one of these dams and put water in the creek, and 24 hours later, it would show up in that reservoir down at the lower intake dam. And these are all set up where one lake would drain into the next, and so it's kind of a tiered structure that delivers water into the creek. All of the dams, all of the lakes at one time had introduced fisheries. None of these lakes naturally had fish in them. The largest predator was probably a long-toed salamander. Once they were introduced with fish, those amphibian populations crashed. The fish eat the amphibians. And some of these lakes still have fish, some of them do not. And essentially, though, since this whole area became federal land, so going all the way back into the 40s and 50s, the city or the water company, the water utility, had a maintenance agreement with the Forest Service. They had to maintain these dams. It was in our best interest to maintain these dams. This is every time you turned on a tap or flushed a toilet or anything for, a generation, it was all coming from this source. And that was kind of unique. And And as we finished up the lower intake dam and started looking at what to do on these wilderness dams, we really started to look for parallels within the country. Where are there other situations like this, where a community has drinking water in a wilderness? We're trying to figure out what to do with it. I've found that working especially with really big entities like the federal government or the Forest Service, like if you can find a model that can be applied to what you're doing, it makes things a lot simpler. We weren't really able to find a comparative model anywhere in the US that really matched what we were trying to do, and so we really had to kind of invent the wheel, and we're still doing that now. We're developing our processes for what we're going to do up here with these dams and lakes. One thing that is unique with the Rattlesnake Wilderness designation and the recreation designation in 1980 is that there's very strong provisional languages in that actual designation. And this is kind of rare in wilderness areas. There's certainly other examples. But because these lakes, and there's a ton of lakes up there, as you can see by this map, the ones in purple are the ones that actually have the dams on it. But because this was our community's drinking water supply, actually in the special provision language of the Wilderness Act, it has language like this, which allow for the owner of the water right to have customary and usual access, including necessary motorized use over and along existing roads and trails to any facility used in connection therewith, and on and on and on to maintain those facilities. And so normally, for those of you that aren't familiar with the wilderness area, they've got these untrammeled characteristics. They don't allow mechanized use. They don't allow motorized use. It really is one of our great ideas that we have created as a society, and it came about in the 1960s. But because of this infrastructure and the reliance of the community on this infrastructure, we, the owner of the water utility, maintain the ability to go in there and manage these dams, and this is unique. So what does management look like? And there's annual management that has to get done every year. These dams have to meet state and federal specifications. We have to do inspection reports. We have to control things like noxious weeds. And normally, that requires a helicopter flight over all of the lakes in June. It's usually not until the end of June that the snow is off the site enough that you can see if there are maintenance issues that need to be addressed in the summer. So, and I'll talk about some of those, but like spillway that's clogged, or valve box that's moved, or God forbid a breach in a dam or something like that. And so a lot of the work is that initial flight and then coming in and removing that woody vegetation that's either growing on the dam. You can't allow trees to grow on the dam because the roots would compromise the integrity. You can't allow those spillways to get blocked. We are also required as part of the special use permit to maintain all the roads and trails. So a lot of people don't realize, but the city, owning the water company, actually has the ability and responsibility to maintain the entire Rattlesnake Main Corridor Road that goes all the way up the Rattlesnake. We do that in collaboration with the Forest Service. We kind of share that role right now. A lot of these dams, because they were built back in the 20s and are starting to fall into disrepair, I'd say that that's actually kind of the norm rather than the exception. Doing any work up there is incredibly labor intensive. It's an 18-mile drive to the end of the road from the Rattlesnake Main Trailhead. That takes 2 hours. It's not an easy drive, and then you've got to hike several miles to get to site. Most of the work we do is manual, but occasionally we have to use power tools, especially in the case of that helicopter. So this is what some of them look like. All the lakes and dams are kind of built the same way. And so McKinley Lake, we're going to talk a lot about McKinley, but this is a really good view of the dam. So you've got this 15-foot high structure. You can see the historic lake line down here. And then, of course, that water gets impounded an extra 15 feet. And then the valve box is right here that would let that water out and let it run down into Carter Lake. slightly lower, like 3-4 feet below the top of the dam, is a spillway. And so this spillway allows that lake to hit a certain point and never overtop the dam. And so when I talk about clearing material from the spillway, that's the safety valve to keep the dam from getting overtopped. Some of them are quite large. Big Lake is, I think this is like a 20 plus foot dam. You can see on this trip, ice flows had messed up the valve box and knocked it over. Warden Lake, Carter Lake, beautiful areas, all hand-stacked rock walls, hand-stacked rock dams, most of them with a timber structure in the middle. One of the things that is kind of interesting about this, and when we look at all these lakes, there's actually, and another thing to consider is there's really valuable storage water rights associated with this. And water rights in the West are incredibly important, and I'm not going to get way into them. But there's actually the community, as we do this work, there's a whole group of folks working on the legal ways to make sure that those water rights, when we demo a dam or change our use, stay within our community. These storage rights, if we lose them from here, can just get picked up by the Thompson Falls Reservoir further down the river. And so making sure that that water can either get put into in-stream use or used for other means in our own community is another big legal thing that we're working on behind the scenes. So in 2019, 2019, we had a big community open house, did a survey online, started to develop project goals. This is when we really started looking at a plan for the wilderness lakes. And these are our main project goals. Before I get to that, I just want to say, have anybody been up to Sanders Lake? It's amazing. This is actually my favorite one. This is the deepest lake. It's actually 200 feet deep. It has 2 dams on it. The valve comes off and has this like 1,000-foot waterfall that drops off the top of it. This is by far, of all the water rights up there, I think Sanders and Big Lake have like 67% of all the water rights just in those 2 lakes. So as we started to work on these wilderness lakes, this is really the sideboards of how we conduct our work, how we do our planning. And goal 1, of course, is we want to eliminate maintenance costs or at least reduce them. We are, and this is money, either taxpayer dollars, but largely utility rate dollars, go towards all of this work. We are spending tens of thousands of dollars every year just to maintain and meet our requirements of maintenance for these structures. For a system that no longer supplies us drinking water and directly conflicts with a lot of our other management goals within the area. We certainly need to always, with any dam, try to reduce safety hazards and maintain those regulatory agency requirements. All of these dams are so far up, if any one of them broke, even with the lake fully full, you would barely see you'd see a rise in Rattlesnake Creek, but it might not be something that you'd recognize. It wouldn't be like a tidal wave coming through town. If you're camped right below the dam, you'd be screwed. You'd probably drown. But this is not like a really, really dangerous situation. If all the dams, all 10 of them, happen to blow all at the same time, we might have some issues in the lower Rattlesnake. But you really wouldn't, by the time it got to this point, it would be pretty dissipated. What you would see, though, setting aside public safety, about 5 miles below these dams is where the bull trout run ends. And there's a waterfall, and bull trout will pack up in there and spend the summer. Big, deep, cool pools. These dams, if they're uncontrolled breaks, would flood that area with sediment and could really impact the fisheries. And there's certainly a lot of other natural resource impacts that would come from an uncontrolled release of any of these dams. We are looking at either decommissioning and or rehabilitating dams. We're looking at all options right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We really do work to balance, both with restoration, seek to also preserve that wilderness character. One of the things that really fundamentally changed when the city took ownership, there's a lot of things that fundamentally changed, but one of them is suddenly the decisions and working on these dams were being made by public servants. And, you know, I think public servants sometimes get a bad rap. I've been one for a while, and it is a fundamentally different way of doing work. We are not trying to get profit. We're pretty much functioning as a nonprofit for public benefit. And that is a very, very different frame of mind than what especially our Forest Service partners were used to seeing for the last 50 years working with a private utility that was largely profit driven. We've been able to shift from kind of an adversarial relationship between the utility and the Forest Service to a full collaboration. And all of a sudden, we're working from the same sheet of music, and wilderness character is just as important to folks that are working within Missoula Water Company and doing this work as the Forest Service that's regulating what work we do. And so it's, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but it certainly changed how we were approaching stuff. And then, of course, goal number 5, of course, gets back to those water rights. We don't want to just abandon them and lose them from our community. So we decided to start off with a pilot project, and we picked McKinley Lake. And so the rest of this talk, I'm going to really be focusing on the work we've done up at McKinley. But McKinley's just under 7,000 feet elevation. It's about a 16-acre lake. The dam is about 15 feet high. The lake is close to 30 when it's at full pool. So you take that dam out. The lake was not that deep. It was really probably only about a 15, 18 foot deep lake to begin with when they built the dam over 100 years ago. There's, you know, at least 20 miles of trails to get up there. And there's a very small 168 acre feet. It's actually one of the smallest storage water rights that we had up there. So when we really started to look at it, and we were looking for a pilot project to work on, McKinley immediately stood out. So one of the things right off the bat, and here's the dam, here's where the valve is in the spillway, or the valve to put water into the creek. Here's the spillway. There was a huge, and I don't know when this happened. It was decades before I started working on the project, but a head cut that began. And there's this 200-foot erosion scar that is marching back. In that photo I showed you of 2018 where the water was about to overtop, that year, this marched back 20 feet. Since then, it's been was moving like a foot or two. But this head cut was going to breach the lake and could potentially drain it down to a puddle, something that would be even less deep than what was historically there. And so it was going to breach itself. So that really rose it to the top of our list. There was also significant seepage, so water moving through the structure, which I don't know if any of you guys are dam engineers. I'm certainly not, but you don't want water to be like piping through your earthen dam. It really does affect the integrity of the structure. It was a really small water right. If we messed up and lost the water right, it wasn't going to be the end of the world. It is also an easement dam, which is really, and I'm not going to get into this, but an easement gives us broad legal rights, where some of the other dams are special use permits. So we have a permit that the Forest Service renews every year versus a permanent easement, where it's kind of like if you have a permanent trail easement across your property, the public kind of owns that, or whoever has the easement kind of owns it. And, you know, our goal again was to kind of do something here that restored the lake level, stopped this erosion from occurring, and allowed it to function without any maintenance. This is probably my most boring slide in the whole presentation. So we really started this in earnest in 2019, and from 2019 to 2023, a lot of it was focused on data collection. A couple other things about this site that made it really difficult is your area, your work window up there is from pretty much mid-July till mid-September. And it just snows on either end. It just takes a long time to get up there. And so a lot of this was done over multiple years. We had to go up and, these are historic structures on federal land. We had to do a full analysis of historic structures. We did ground penetrating radar. This was actually done in 2000 to look at like what the core of the dam looked like and to try to find out where it was seepage seeping through. Did a bunch of other monitoring. We did test pits on top of the dam. One of the big things, and I've got the as-built of the dam from 1923. It's the only dam up there that didn't show a log timber structure on the inside of it. Knowing whether or not there was a timber structure inside the dam was incredibly important if you're going to dismantle the thing. It would either add weeks of time or shave off weeks of time, depending on whether or not those logs were there. We got some weird stuff with our ground penetrating radar, so we ended up going up and hand digging pits for 2 days just to get like 6 feet down to see if we could find logs, and we didn't. Bunch of veg sampling, a bunch of fisheries and reptile and amphibian monitoring. We also started doing case studies because we wanted to kind of figure out what restoration was going to look like when we turn this lake back into its historic footprint. During that same time, we were doing a ton of collaboration and engineering. Our partners at Trout Unlimited, and actually coming off the end of the removal of the lower intake dam, we had a very good partner, the Legacy Foundation, which has actually had money from the Hewlett-Packard Foundation. It was specifically for dam removal. They just gave us the money to do this, all this engineering. And so the engineering and design was funded right out of the gate, which was great. And so we did a bunch of engineering. We had to do a bunch of meeting with the Forest Service and engineering consulting. And then we decided, because it was our pilot project and we could not find a good example of where this had been done in other communities at the same level in the same situation, we decided to basically do every assessment that there is that we could do. So we did a Montana, a MEPA, Montana Environmental Protection Act environmental assessment, a NEPA, a national one, a minimum tools requirement. We just did it all. We wanted to check every box moving forward. So this is what we were dealing with. This is that drawing from when they built the dam that shows the structure faced with rock on, and it even says right here, no cribbing. And we just couldn't figure out why that would be, but they didn't build it with any cribbing. What's cool about it is you also had all the engineers' notes on this plan set. And so we knew exactly how many yards of earth were moved, how much rock cribbing was built. We knew that it took 8 men, 2 teams, 1 packer for a total of 4 weeks to clear the 6.7 acres of timber, which is in the bathtub ring around the lake. They cut the timber, stockpiled it, and used it to build their structures. We knew that the dam construction required 16 men, 9 mule teams, 1 packer, and 15 pack horses. We also had the wage scale for those workers. And so back in 1922 to 23, and they did all this in a year, which was crazy. But at the time, this was one of the last ones they built. There was full communities up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness. They had full stock camps. They had mule trains coming in over Grant Creek. This site is actually, as the crow flies, about 3 miles from Snowbowl. It's closer to Snowbowl than it is to the Rattlesnake Main Trailhead. And so their machinery to build these things was well in place. But yeah, in 20s, I mean, you're making $5 a day up there. That's actually probably pretty good. And if you had a horse, you get an extra $1. And if you had a team of horses, you get $2. So this is what it looked like. Again, rock face dam. Here's the back side of the dam. The lake's on this side. If you look at the face of the dam, here's this valve structure where you'd stick, there used to be a platform that would come out, and you could stick a long rod down in there and open up the valve to let water out and through the dam. This is a shot from the top of the dam of the trail if you're walking along it. And this is that bathtub ring. This lake was actually, the valve was fully opened in 2018. And so the lake was still filling up fully, but then it would drain, and then by August, you'd have something like this. And so it wasn't permanently closed. We had intentionally left that valve open so that it would drain and not keep pressure on the backside of that dam. And so you can see all these stumps. This was the 6.7 acres going around the whole thing. They got logged and then used to build the dam. And we're starting to see some restoration here, but of course the big question is, what level of site restoration would we have to do when we got up there and removed the dam? Our preliminary plan, in general, we wanted to put a breach in this thing, so we did more complex engineering than this, but we're making a cut to allow this breach to pass large logs and material. Any fill from that cut we were going to deposit on site. All these dams are about the same. You'd find a log skid yard somewhere where they'd bring all the logs to. You'd find the dam itself. Every area, as close as you could get to the dam, would be a borrow pit. And so you can see these stunted trees here is where they salvage all the material to build this thing. And this was all done, of course, by hand and horsepower, where you're just moving every rock, moving every shovelful to build this thing. We weren't going to do a full removal. We're actually leaving some of the structure up there for historic preservation. We also really wanted to understand what levels of restoration needed to be done. And then eventually our long-term plan was to, when we're done, turn this over to the Forest Service. This is no longer a city facility. We're giving up our easement. It is now Forest Service property. And so that was the long-term goal. We started to get into our methods. Again, I mentioned we did like every bit of planning and permitting you're required to. And as we started to develop these methods, we really were thinking about effects to wilderness character, those natural resources, costs, access, safety, timing, and duration. I mentioned this as well, so this is the main cherry stem that goes up with wilderness on either side. When you get to the wilderness area boundary, you can park here. You can actually drive to about there, but then you still have about 4 miles of hiking to get to McKinley, and then, a 2-hour drive to get to this point. And so it was pretty far up there. When we finally got engineering done, we were looking at this 75-foot breach at the base of the dam in which we would build a new stream channel. We had a lot of material to move. We were looking at ways to do it within discussions with the Forest Service and also with Wilderness Watch, who we had several meetings with as well because they'd done some work similar to this and were familiar with projects in other areas. I can't remember what meeting it was. I mean, we were looking at all different ways to do this, and someone said, "Have you ever thought of explosives?" And we were like, "No, we hadn't." Long story short, we realized that explosives are an approved tool within a wilderness, and with explosives, you don't necessarily need to stockpile and make fill areas because you're just spreading everything all over the site. So we got into actually looking at construction methods, and I'll go through this a little bit quicker, but we originally looked at 5 different alternatives, from modern construction methods, which is flying in like a small excavator in pieces, reassembling it on site, doing the work with machinery. That was still going to take about 56 days, 6 laborers. We did a full hand labor method, like doing it exactly the way it was built with humans and horses. That was spreading the project over 2 seasons, which was really difficult on this site because we didn't want to leave the dam in a state where when the water filled up, it would breach. We looked at a heavy lift helicopter, and then we started to look at combinations of hand labor and modern with blasting. We did all these different calculations to figure out where we would land. When we finally got into our minimum required analysis framework, which is a really great acronym that the Forest Service uses to basically say, let's put all our tools together and figure out the best way to do this. And we had kind of gotten down to 3 alternatives. In all of these, we landed on basically alternative 2. And so traditional tools with minimum motorized use. And the main use was going to be 2 days of helicopter use. So at the very beginning of the project, we flew in our camp, we flew in all of our tools, we flew in all of that kind of stuff. And then at the tail end, at the very end, that fall, we flew in and we brought it all out. And then we needed a motorized pump, and I'll show you why, and a motorized auger. It's also worth noting that a wheelbarrow or any wheeled structure does not meet minimum or wilderness character either, so we had to get approval to use a wheelbarrow, that kind of stuff. And what really developed over time, and as we were working through this, was all of a sudden where this had started, and it was necessary discussions, but it took 4 years to figure out how to do this work. And it took about 2 months to do the work, and it cost less. And so we were really happy to get to the point where we could actually do something. But during that time, what we evolved was a full partnership with the forest versus just them being a regulatory agency. And so by the time we got to removal, they said, well, we can give you our blasters. And we brought in Forest Service blasters. Well, you can use our stock train out of the 9-mile Remont station. And so it became a partnership. So first thing we had to do was fly in all this 6-inch siphon pipe. We needed to gain more time. We could not start this in August. And so we set up siphons that ran out into the lake, 4 of them that went over the dam. This is what the conditions were clearing. This is 4th of July, right around the 4th of July. Had to clear all this snow to get our siphon pipes over to start to drain the lake faster so that we could work in the dry when we got there. Had to set up a camp. This is Camp McKinley. This is Rob from Trout Unlimited, Tristan from City Engineering. I wasn't as lucky as them. They both, I think Tristan was up there for like 60 days. It fundamentally changed him. But Rob was only up there for about 40. And then after the camp was set up, siphons were going. It was time to start working. I feel like I missed a slide here. Hold on. We had to start prepping the site for blasting. And so Montana Conservation Corps, we got 2 hitches out of them. We spent 20 days just moving rock off the face of the dam to salvage that rock so that we could use it to rebuild the stream channel. And then the pack train showed up, and the blasters showed up, and these Forest Service blasters and these Forest Service packers were just amazing people, total experts. I thought they were going to show up and just do it. We had holes pre-dug for them for the bombs, but they're like, no, you're helping us make bombs. And so they brought in 1,000 pounds of ammo, and we were making these trash can bombs with detonators and putting them in holes and putting them in strings across the top of the dam. We ended up doing it in 2 blasts. The last blast, we actually built these humongous pipe bombs out of our siphons and shoved them into the valve box to blow that up as well. And so on this one, you can see, this is the amount of rock we moved off the face to salvage. But this is what we blew up. This is what it looked like with those first explosions. And that first lift, and I've got videos that I really hope will play. The first lift, these holes, we dug down about 6 feet. So the first lift is all this material. The second lift is all this material and all this rock. So one of the things with these videos is that they do not have sound. For some reason, these 2 blasting videos, so you just have to think in your mind, boom. This video is we're a 1/4 mile away from the site right now. This is the dam. This is the lake. Our camp is off in the woods right here. That was the first blast, throwing rocks hundreds of yards out into the lake and then sending up that plume. I mean, these trees are 80 to 100 feet tall. This dust cloud, we're all yelling right now. We're a 1/4 mile away. And then all of a sudden you're feeling grit in your teeth. Like there was so much material that got released from this first explosion. That was about 1,000 pounds of ammo. The next blast is about 800 pounds, but it, yeah, there's a picture of it in case the video didn't work. This next blast is the second lift, and it wasn't as tall, but there was a lot more rock. So I want you to watch the lake and watch these rocks that are coming out. And this, I wish the sound was here because it was the craziest sound I've ever heard. And some of these rocks, you think a quarter mile, you're fine, but it was like throwing stuff almost 3 football fields away from the explosion. And so this is in slow motion. This one was a little bit slower, but you're still seeing splashes like out in here. At the time and when we were doing this, you know, we had trail guards posted miles away from this. We had to close down the entire site to the public. Like this one right here is scary close. The blasters were standing like right here on the far end of the lake. We almost hit the whole other end of the lake with rock. Yes, it was going the other way too. Yeah, it's all 3-dimensional. I could watch videos of these all day. There are some online. After the first blast, this is what we were dealing with. We had to come in, we had to hand dig holes again. Took a day of digging to then reload the holes to do the second blast. After the second blast, this is what we were dealt with. This is Rob and Tristan looking at it going, oh man, now it's time for handwork. And so from this point on, we had to build several hundred feet of stream channel and then recontour all that. And, you know, that took another 3+ weeks, 3-4 weeks. So in essence, we went from that to that. This is completely done with that stream channel in and those sides contoured. We actually had salvage plants that we put back in that we had salvaged at the beginning of the project. On the back side, you go from that to that. And so this is our breach. This is our stream channel. Every one of these rocks was placed by hand. And one of the things to note here, the lake, we drew it down much deeper than we needed to. We wanted to make sure there was enough freeboard there that if a major storm came through or a lot of water, it wasn't going to flood our work site. And so the lake in all these photos is lower than it would be naturally. So again, looking from the top of the dam, went from that to looking at this big breach. And then all said and done, obviously we left a lot of this rock structure. We left the majority of the dam, but there is that breach. And by the end of the project, we'd actually, and this is in mid-September, late September, the lake was starting to march up here. And so unfortunately, and this was all 2024, this was like the last trip. In early October, we looked at this site and we're like, okay, we'll see you in 6 months. And came back and we'd not actually got to see any of this stuff actually pass water. And so this photo is from July this year, or this video. And you can see water moving through the site and then a really nice lake. This one did have sound, but oh well. And so that lake is back at its normal depth or historic depth. You can see the bathtub ring that is still, in July. Again, snow has just left this, and stuff is just starting to green up. This summer will be the first time that this spring coming up will be the first time that this site actually sees a peak flow event. Last year in 2024, we left it in the fall, and the lake just had to fill and then barely started going down the channel. Now we're entering winter with the lake at its historic level, and so it will certainly start to convey a lot more water. And so we anticipate that this will be the first year that actually starts to go beyond just that stream channel and flood in some of that little riparian area. So almost done here. One of the big questions that came up when we were developing the restoration plan was, what do we have to restore? When we first started discussions, there was folks that wanted us to restore this entire bathtub ring around the entire lake. And so that's, 50 plus acres of replanting that would need to be done. We did a case study where we went up and looked at two examples. Little Lake, which actually its spillway breached in 1996, 97, when we had our big snow year. It actually breached, and so the lake has been permanently drawn down. And Glacier Lake, which is also a permanent drawdown. And went back and just wanted to see a case study of what happens to these lakes once we roll back the dam. Are they gonna restore? Are we gonna be dealing with weeds or invasive species? We wanna make sure we have a nice, healthy habitat here. Glacier Lake has been drawn down for 10 years. This is what the bathtub ring looks like with no restoration. This is all passive restoration. And so through our case studies, we realized that we really just needed to get this on the right trajectory. So we spent 4 years, every year, making sure there wasn't a single invasive species on site, making sure everything that came in was incredibly washed and clean. Some of the things we worried about was bringing in seed. If you're bringing in seed from down here to spread up there, you're probably bringing in weeds. You're bringing in things that you don't want to have established on site. So we realized it really was best to get it on the right trajectory and let nature take its course and regrow these habitats. And so that's where we ended up and where we are today. So next steps, in 2024 and 2025, this September and October, city crews have been working on Sanders Lake. This is Sanders Lake. The valve through Sanders Lake, this was the big one that going off the cliff, is crushed or blocked. And that is causing that lake to not drain and putting pressure, and we're starting to get piping through the dam. We went up and tried to dig it out twice now to try it. We actually took the siphons from McKinley this year over to Sanders to drain it quicker so that we could access it. We've not been able to repair it. In winter 25-26, we actually have, from our pilot project, some good momentum and potential funding to do a full NEPA for 6 more dams that just easily make sense to remove. Small water rights, not huge lifts. The idea is to do the same process we did with McKinley, but do it for 6 dams. It'll take the same amount of time. And then every time there's resources available, we can just start picking one of these off every couple of years. We are certainly working on that triage plan for Sanders. I think when I say makes sense to remove, this is another question that we're starting to address, and we're starting to have intentional conversations about. And these are ones that I know will be, because we are a public entity, I work for a municipality, we're working on federal lands. These are not discussions that get made in the dark. These are discussions that are made on the floor council chambers, in public comment periods, in open houses, that kind of stuff. These are public assets that we're managing. One of the things that we've realized through this whole work is Sanders and Big Lake, and Big Lake has a functioning valve, and we have been doing releases every year. In August, we can go up to Big Lake and open up the valve and put an extra 1 cc into the creek, and you see it on the stream gauge in Greeno Park 24 hours later. The math tells us that those 2 lakes, if we actually looked at repairing those dams, we could double the flows in Rattlesnake Creek from July through September. If you believe in climate change and you believe things are getting drier, this is a decision point that I think is going to be a really important one for us to start to think about as a community. Do we want the ability to ensure that Rattlesnake Creek doesn't run dry from natural causes? And this is, when I started this work, I was definitely a proponent of tear them all out, get us out of the wilderness. All of a sudden, as we've started to really look at this could be a way to ensure long-term stability of the Rattlesnake Creek fishery in perpetuity, or for hundreds of years from now. And so that is a huge decision that we are going to be making as a community, and these discussions are going to begin and really get going in earnest over the next 5 years. This is a decision point that we will be making as a community in our lifetimes, which is pretty exciting. Meanwhile, there are 6 dams that just need to go. So this year or next year in summer 26, we're really starting on some of those data collections for natural and cultural resources to inform those NEPAs. We have to continue working on McKinley. We probably have another in 27, assuming everything's on the right trajectory and nothing's damaged and we're getting good restoration. That site would get turned over to the Forest Service. It's really interesting. It took like 7 months to realize how to actually do that. We have to like actually do a bill of sale and sell it to them for $1. It's probably going to cost like $50 to get a check for $1, but we will actually have to give the dam officially to the Forest Service and rescind our easement on the property. And so that is slated for McKinley in 27, and hopefully by 27 we're starting to move away, pick through some of these other dams as well. Lots of information. I've taken too much time, but yeah, I'd happily take any questions. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. If anyone has questions, we'll just bring around the microphone. Got one here.
Pardon? I have. Isn't it crazy? It's super cool to see. I mean, I just, anytime you do a restoration project like that, it's a build it and they will come kind of scenario. And we were waiting for a beaver, and it's pretty amazing that now we've pulled a dam. He's talking about the lower intake dam on the Rattlesnake. We pulled that dam, restored that site. 5 years later, there's another dam getting built there, but it's getting built by a beaver. So that's okay. Yeah, it's exciting stuff. Yeah.
As well, did you guys do anything to the channel, or is it just removing the infrastructure and the reservoir?
No. Oh, yeah, we did a full channel rebuild. And actually, you know, when we had to move the water to get so that we could work in the dry on the actual dam, you know, we flipped it in a side channel, and then that allowed us to rebuild the new channel that it was going to sit in.
Was it pretty channelized before then?
Well, it was, and you know, it did kind of go into it just brushed up against that cliff that's there that was just absolutely scenic and beautiful. And so there was a good portion of the channel that did not need to be rebuilt, which was basically this bend right here to there. But everything from this point down was built. Everything from this point up was built. Some of the things we had to add because of the way that the creek had been filling is really sculpt out some big holes for fish to hang out in and just add some of that complexity within the channel itself.
And then I just wanted to ask about invasive species as well, like opening up all that new bare earth. Was that an issue, and how did you guys mitigate that?
Yeah, and I mean, we and I think a lot of people don't realize this is, you know, several years of planning to get to this point, a year or so to get this done, and then 3 to 5 years worth of maintenance afterwards. I mean, we're still investing. Last year was the first year since 2020 where we've removed almost all the browse fencing. The rattlesnake tends to have a bit of an urban deer problem as well, and so had to make sure those plants established. But then a significant amount of volunteerism on weed control, a significant amount of time from city crews to go in and do weed control. Now that riparian area is really knitting together, we are starting to see good competition and less invasive species. But yeah, you had to get it on the right trajectory for sure. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was whether or not the Forest Service is on board for helping pay for renovation of dams. And actually there's on Sanders, there's 2 dams, and so a smaller North Dam and a South Dam, so it's 3 dams on 2 lakes. Short answer is no. We would have to do it on our own. We would have to figure out, what is interesting is legally, the way the wilderness designation is written, and then also the way that our permits are drafted, we actually have many more rights to maintain and repair. We have less rights to decommission and remove. And that was a big discussion that wasn't a big part of it. I just sat in the room and watched lawyers talk. Just when the Wilderness Act was written and when those use permits and those easements were written, there was no thought of decommissioning. These were always going to be something that remained there and needed to be repaired. And so we had to kind of get through some legal gray areas to allow us to actually decommission, which is, it seems odd, but it's the way it is. And that's why we decided to start with the pilot project.
Follow-up question then is that if the Forest Service isn't willing to help out to refurbish those dams, so to speak, they would fall under the right of repair versus decommission.
Yes. Yes, that is true. And you know what that would look like on something like Big Lake is you would strip all these boulders, you'd drain it, you'd strip all these boulders, you'd cut a trench and repair the pipe. You'd face this with impermeable membrane and then recover it with rock so you couldn't get seepage through. Some of the other things, and you know, when you talk about repair, and again, we've not even made the decision to do it, but it wouldn't, we have technology now that you don't need to go all the way up there to open a valve. With satellites, you can click a mouse and control water and water releases. So even with repair, you would see long-term reduction in motorized use. I don't know how you would do a repair up there without motorized equipment, given the challenge that we have in this working environment. We've certainly shown that demolition is possible with very limited mechanized use or tools, and the Forest Service is I think we've built a model with McKinley to replicate on other dams. Talking to Forest Service blasters and packers, they're like, even if we're told we can't work on this project, we'll be there. Like, we'll come in on our day off. Like, they loved it. That was just such a great collaboration. Yeah.
I'm curious what your biggest hurdles were, you'd say, especially being like a city employee for one. And then my other question is, if people had any backlash towards you guys in regards to like Wilderness Act and using motorized tools and wheels and stuff like that, what like public response has been to that?
I mean, our biggest hurdle definitely was developing the model to do this demolition. I think one of the things that we have as working within small government is we can be pretty nimble. We can move pretty quickly. Like that lower Rattlesnake intake dam, the fact that we were able to do all of our fundraising, get all our permitting and engineering done, and remove it in a little over 3 years, that's not something that you normally see in big government. It takes longer. So I think that is one of our benefits. Certainly one of our challenges is our resources. Trying to do this work where we're not putting the burden on Missoula taxpayers or on water ratepayers. Right now, portions of your water bill are going to maintaining these structures. And so there is already some inherent costs there. The second part of your question was, pushback. Yeah. Well, with McKinley, I think that they're really, from the dam removal perspective, we have not found anyone that doesn't support doing a removal. It's the tools that are being used to do that removal. There was a lot of pushback when we were looking at different alternatives from folks that really wanted the city to maintain, follow the letter of the law as far as access into a motorized area, even though we had full rights to fly in the water company when it was private. I mean, they actually flew in bulldozers and did work on occasion. They'd fly in a big walk-behind weed trimmer to mow the tops of all the dams. And we don't do that kind of stuff anymore. But so the tools and how the tools were going to be used, and that was where I did find a lot of value in going through the process of the minimum tools analysis, the MRAF, with the Forest Service, where we looked at absolutely everything, and stuff started to filter out. One of the things that really filtered out the hand tools more than anything was 2 years work window. We did not know how we were going to stabilize the site. The other thing was when they built those dams, and they built them by hand, but they had like 20 plus people living up there for months. This site would not support that. You can't actually have that many people on site. You can only have a group size of 10 up there right now. And so The damage that would be done just by having to keep stock and people on site for 140 days to remove it was going to really not be the best thing for the site. The other thing that was kind of surprising, and we tried, but those traditional skills are lost. There's not a lot of people that actually do the work. Like, we had a lot of folks that are like, oh yeah, I'm a horse packer, I'll bring you stuff in. And I'm like, no, we need you to stay up there for 140 days and pull a slip behind your horse and move dirt the whole time. They're like, oh yeah, we don't do that. We'll bring you bring in your materials. And we found like one outfit out of New Mexico that still does some of that stuff, but like we just couldn't find people that have those skills that were used to build the dam in the first place. And so that is where we really moved into that hybrid model of a little bit of mechanized use, whole bunch of handwork, and then a whole bunch of explosives.
Right. I guess knowing what you do now, are you going to continue with the exact same strategy, or are there things you're going to change from what you did at McKinley on future dams?
There will be some tweaks. I think, some of them, like Warden, which is the valve is broken, it's permanently full. Like, you're going to have a siphon on it. Sheridan and Glacier. Glacier is a very small one. It fills up and drains. Like, you saw those trees growing in the beach line. It's not even filling up anymore. Like, you could probably not do the siphons. And so, every one would be slightly different. I think that we could, based on siphon, if the tricky thing with those 6-inch siphons, and we probably could have gotten away without a motorized pump, but like we were setting them up in a snowstorm, and it was either haul 5-gallon buckets for 2 days to get your siphon started. It's just like starting a siphon out of a fish tank, or put on that drill-operated pump and fill it up in a few hours and start your siphons and leave. And come back in 2 months. That kind of time and money savings is hard to not keep. Yeah.
With that head cut, I can't remember which lake it is.
Yeah, McKinley.
It's on McKinley. Okay.
Yeah.
So now it's not even an issue. And not really.
Yeah, it will never. I mean, the lake, you can barely see the old beach line. This is pretty much what we brought it back to. It's a little bit higher than what it was historically, but it will never really fill this or access this. And from this point to here is taller than this room in elevation. So, yeah.
Were there ever any thoughts of using that, being like, all right, this head cut's already here, the stream channel's kind of already there,
right?
Like transferring the site, completely plugging that side and putting it out that
We talked about that a bit. The amount of material that would need to be dealt with here was so much more, just because you're dealing with hundreds of feet versus, a 15-foot rise with only 20 feet on top. The other thing, and there was a lot of talk about restoring the beach line and then also restoring this cut. And we just realized our actions to restore would probably do more damage than just taking away the causative factor, which was those floodwaters and the erosion, and letting it re-veg. The other thing we realized, actually, to go back just a little bit, we were doing our NEPA process, and we were ready to get our permit approval in early January, or in December, and then our project got put on hold by the Forest Service because they had some timber contracts that had to get done first. And then, so we turned the calendar year, and when January hit, suddenly wolverines and whitebark pine had been added to the endangered species list. So we had to go back and reanalyze that stuff. And what was kind of cool is we'd already done a whitebark pine survey up here. And the data that the Forest Service had was like 2 individual trees, like here and here. And actually it was a handful, I think there was a few. And we were going to be required to like fully put blast mats around the entirety of the tree to protect them from the rocks. But we were like, oh wait, our data, we've got thousands of whitebark pine up there, and we've got whitebark pine that are actually establishing within this cut. And so we were able to show that there was actually a population of whitebark on site. And so losing a few individuals, and we lost a couple that were right here, was not going to really, cause a population crash. But some of that disturbance, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here, to see whether or not something like a whitebark pine that is really just suffering out there in the world, if this does open up some ability for those populations to expand as well.
Sorry, I think we gotta wrap up. We only have the room for a couple more minutes.
I'll be here
But I
for a
think,
bit
yeah,
more.
if we can thank Morgan, and yeah, thanks so much. This was really great.
Thank you, everybody.